Hey everyone, this is a very special edition of Friday the 40th, our year-long look at the Friday the 13th franchise, as we have with us the man who literally wrote the book on Jason Voorhees, a book which I have right here. First edition Sparkplug Press, everybody. Um, Crystal Lake Memories, The Complete History of Friday the 13th, Mr. Peter Bracke. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, that's
Okay, I
right.
just want to make sure I
You got
got
it
that
right.
right. Probably should have done that before we jumped on, but so I'm thrilled to have you here, as with Lee
Yeah.
Shoquist of ChicagoFilm, my compatriot in all things Jason. So to kick it off, Peter, what is your interest in horror and specifically the Friday the 13th franchise? How did you become obsessed with Jason?
Sure. Well, it's funny. I'm actually a Chicago native. So I grew up on the west side of Chicago, yeah, Belmont and Central area.
Nice.
So I was just a kid in the 70s, early 80s, loved movies, loved horror movies. It was just always probably my favorite genre. Like Star Wars was cool, but I loved oh my God, I was like a kid in the candy store in the early 80s. Every week was a new horror movie, new slasher movie. Loved Halloween, Friday the 13th, and Nightmare on Elm Street, of course. So really, I just, I went to film school in Los Angeles out here. So that's where I'm at now. Moved out, and God, this was, I'm dating myself, in the 90s. So graduated, and I became a movie reviewer. I was a movie reviewer, doing press junkets and red carpets. I'd written a couple other books, and it was 2002. I always loved, sorry, Friday the 13th. And this was like the era when DVD was kind of really catching steam, but they hadn't done any sort of Friday the 13th special editions or anything. This was before Freddy versus Jason. So for most people, Friday the 13th was like this franchise that kind of died out. And it was just, I went to the screening. It was 2002. I remember it vividly. It was July. And they had a anniversary screening of Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D, in actual 3D. And they secretly invited like three of the cast members to come and kind of surprised them. Richard Brooker showed up.
Wow.
And he didn't know. His friends were like, hey, we're taking you to this thing. He had no idea. And it's a screening. And they were all just like that, like, oh my God, I haven't thought about this movie in like 20 some years. And I can't believe anyone's even here. Like, it was kind of before the series that, again, Freddy versus Jason kind of brought it back a little bit. It was just one of those things. I was in the audience, and I remember going home because I was, a journalist, and I was like, I want to do another book, and I want to do something cool. What can I do? And my agent at the time was like, you got to write another book. And it was just one of those things like, oh, like this would be great. Like no one's ever talked about Friday the 13th. I mean, because at the time it was like Halloween had some critical respect, Nightmare on Elm Street did. Friday the 13th, as you guys know, was kind of like the bastard child of all the slasher franchises. With the critics, they all hated it. So no one had ever talked about it. Again, there's no really DVDs. So it's just like, it was awesome. And it's foolish me. I thought, oh, I'll maybe do 10, 20 interviews and make a little book and it'll be great. And then 3 years later, it turned into the book you see before you. So it just sort of grew and grew. And I think what was exciting about it was just looking at something that hadn't been appreciated or really talked about. As a writer, you're always looking for something. You want to be able to bring something to it. Like you don't really want to write about something that's been analyzed to death. Good luck to anyone writing a Star Wars book or something, right? Or James Bond. There's a million. There's always like a stuff to talk about. But so that's probably the main thing, was just being able to look at a series that I really enjoyed and wasn't critically appreciated, and kind of give it a sort of a perverse like deluxe treatment. Like that was a joke we had, like, let's make a coffee table book like you would for James Bond, but for Friday the 13th. And it was, kind of a crazy idea at the time. Now it makes sense because, as we know, like there's conventions and, things have changed so much. There's documentaries in every horror movie imaginable. Every horror movie now gets like a deluxe 5-disc Blu-ray, but at the time that wasn't the case. So yeah, so that's a very long-winded answer to your question. But
Cool. Now, you had a lot of access to the talent behind the movies, and I imagine it took several years just to
yeah.
interview everybody and call this together. What was as a fan, what was the biggest surprise, or maybe there's a few of them, one of the big revelations that struck you about the series when you dug in, did your research, and started talking to people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is before Facebook or social media, really. The internet was around. But back then, like, you literally had to call Screen Actors Guild, Directors Guild, and say, I'd like to get in, I'm trying to get in touch with Amy Steele. Can you help? And I had to write letters. I wrote probably 250 letters, faxes. It was a lot of work. So it's funny when you say, oh, you had access. There was no access. It was like, real challenge and convincing people, because the biggest surprise, not surprise, but the biggest thing I remember was almost everyone was like Friday the 13th, you want to talk about that? Like, they just didn't connect that there was a fan base still. They all thought of it as like this thing they did back in the 80s that no one cared about anymore, you know. Because for most of the people, Friday the 13th was not, you know, the end run of their career. You know, it was like that's something you did to start out so you could go on and do prestigious projects, you know. So that was probably the biggest thing, was just telling people, no, like there's people care about these movies, you know, and there is a fan base for it. So that, and then the second thing probably was, you know, again, when there was no information on the movies really too much, it was the best part for me was that voyage of discovery. Like, you know, you didn't sit down and say, okay, you know, part 5 is going to be the one with the crazy director, you know, and part 6 is going to be the fun one where everyone felt like a family. You know, you didn't know the production history. So discovering all that and kind of figuring out, oh, this movie kind of had this story behind it. That was the most fun part, was kind of getting to kind of learn the color of each production. So that was always a surprise, was just some of those stories, like your jaw would drop, like you'd hear like, oh my God, like, you know, like you guys know the story behind part 5 and stuff, you know. Danny Steinman, the director, is like, just hearing some of the stories was like, oh my God, you know, as a fan, like, oh my God, really? Like, what? Like, this is crazy. So that was really cool. So yeah. So
Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I just am enjoying this because you know, Peter, when you were describing the '80s and the world of the '80s and all of it, I mean, that was certainly my upbringing as well, and I you know, I lived on these things, which Ian and I have talked about so many times,
yes.
and to be honest with you, you know, I think I'm still living on this one.
Yes.
A very big part of my life, and has been since I was about 12 years old. Of course, you know, as you know, at that time, I mean, we were all sort of forbidden from seeing these things theatrically. So you would just sneak in, sit way down in your seat, hope that somebody might be nice enough to buy you a ticket, whatever it was. But the whole mystique of being able to see these movies theatrically, if you could swing it, was just something that never for me was left in nostalgia. It's always been a big part of my life as I've gone on, and I've never sort of let go of it. And part of it is you know, this adolescent mystique with movies before you had access to them to the degree that you do now. And so I guess I would say that as all the, you know, the whole boom, the slasher boom from maybe 78 to 84, which would be considered the heyday, this whole idea of that a link to the dawn of home video, and the idea that you could bring the machine home from Blockbuster and bring the movies with you, and just, you know, this is all sort of a big world of Friday the 13th nostalgia, not just Friday the 13th, but the whole horror movie nostalgia for that, which is just linked to adolescence for me. So I you know, now in the world of living with mortgages and everything else that we have to live with as adults, I still live in this world, and so so that's kind of why we're kicking all this stuff around. So I just feel kindred spirits with you and Ian and others, and so many of us that are so connected to this stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, you tried to explain to like my nieces and nephews, and it's hard to explain to people. You didn't have access to movies like you do now. So, you know, you would read about things in Fangoria for months or years sometimes, and you couldn't just go and see it. Like, you know, not everyone had a VCR. They were really expensive, and not everything was on video. So you had to try to see it in the theater. So I think of it, I don't know how you think, Lee, is it was kind of like a scene or a culture around it. Like, you know, you read magazines and traded stories with friends, and you had to put a lot of effort to go and find these movies. So the experience of seeing them is really, I think, etched in our brains. Whereas I think today, maybe, you know, you can just go online. There's 5,000 things at the touch of a button. It's not like the same connection to so it's not just the movie Friday the 13th or those films. It's the experience of seeing them that I think we're so connected to, and it's so and burned into my brain. And it's an experience that I'm so happy that I had that experience as a kid, you know, to see all that kind of stuff. And I remember the same thing. I remember me and my brother went to see The Fog. I was 11. And so we sat outside the theater at 10 and paid this older couple $5 to pretend to be our parents so we could get in. Like, kids don't have to do that today. So all that's wrapped up in my memories of the movie. So, but what shocks me, I don't know if you guys have experiences meeting kids today at conventions. I call them kids. I'm so old. Like, who are 15 or 20 years old, and they love these movies, and I'm just like kind of shocked because they see them on video, and I always wondered if they had the same connection. But there's something about these movies that is still connecting, which does surprise me, because I thought maybe, you know, 40 years later this would just seem like a dated, funny movie to kids. But It's weird. It's very weird. So that I don't understand. Like, I don't understand the connection today.
Yeah, there's something so experiential about it too. I could tell you that,
Mhm.
I saw, part 5 on the Friday night midnight movie of the opening weekend, and exactly what somebody said, at some particular point in the movie. I mean, it's a whole experiential thing that, it transcends just
Mhm.
just seeing the movie.
Yeah.
And of course, the movies are quite different as they moved across the eras, also from
Yeah.
1980 on through. So there, for me, and Ian and I always joke when we get post number 5 for me, because number 5 was always my threshold for the 5 that I really loved. There's just a different, they're in a different realm after that, at least for me. So there was something magical about the movies, or innocence about the movies, or innocence about the ensembles in the movies, or the actors in the movies, or they were just kind of generically nice young people before they became kind of hip, cool, really calculated, and super cynical. And so I just have a lot of nostalgia for 1 through 5.
Yeah. The same thing. 1 through 4 and 5 is Shtick. Absolutely. That was the prime age for it. And after that, they become more. Well, people forget that the first 4 were more mainstream movies. Like, those movies did really well. Like, even people, I remember friends like, "Oh, Friday the 13th is scary horror. We should go see it." And after like 4, most of my friends were like, "Oh, I'm tired of that." They moved on to other things, and only the core fan base really saw 6 and beyond. They became more like gimmick movies. Okay, now we have Jason in space. Now he's getting resurrected as a zombie. Now he's fighting Carrie, and they started to they became more like, a gimmick movie each time, whereas the first 4 have more of a purity to them, maybe,
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you this question, Peter. This is what I've often thought, is that the mystique of the villain in the film, which in this case, of course, in all of them except for one, is Jason. I think in the sort of Freddy villain as well. If you look at Nightmare on Elm Street, once the mystique is taken away from the character of Jason in the movie, they somehow sort of fail to frighten me in some meaningful way. And so it becomes less about the survival of who's on screen, or the nuances of the actual characters in the movie, and so much more about the novelty of this iconic sort of thing that fell into pop culture, this character of Jason. And so it's a little more about the contrivances of who's got telepathic powers, or how can we resurrect in Jason Goes to Hell, or what's the novelty of the movie. So the idea of the scary Friday the 13th to me is really in the origins of the series in the first several movies, and then after that it just becomes a cultural joke in a way. So when you say people sort of just felt like they had moved on from it, I think the franchise, in my view, sort of moved on from what was so effective about it in the first in its early era, and so I kind of moved on to, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I still saw all of them, and they were still kind of fun, but I knew the magic wasn't quite there. Part of it is age, and two, you talk about, like, the whole point of horror movies is to take some sort of cultural fear, bring it out into the light, and deal with it. And once you do that a few times, the whole point is it becomes less scary. So, this is getting really highfalutin, but like in the 70s, it was all about. I remember as a kid, I don't know how you were, Lee, that sort of sense of, the idea of some crazy maniac could just come into your house and supposedly safe suburbia or to summer camp and just kill you for no reason. I remember growing up with John Wayne Gacy and hearing about Charles Manson and the Night Stalker, and that was a really strong cultural fear. And so I think a big reason the slasher killers became successful at that time was because they were tapping into something going on in the culture. And that naturally wanes. And when you become older and get to be our age, you're worried about, real death, cancer, and not being able to pay your bills. So I think a lot of the fears that Friday the 13th dealt with successfully early on were more childhood fears and that sort of thing. And I think you naturally kind of outgrow that too. So, and two, I mean, can Jason, after 8, 9 movies, if Jason's a bobblehead figure on a lunchbox, can he be that scary,
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of primal fears, right? That you would in a horror film exploit either societal fears, as we know happen across eras, depending upon what we were going through as a culture, but primal fears that will never go out of style, like the idea of fear of the dark, fear of something being under the bed, fear of bodily dismemberment, the primal fears that will sort of always be there. I mean, the idea in the first, of course, in Halloween, but certainly in the origins of Friday the 13th also, was this primal fear of the dark, that you might be, alone and defenseless, and there would be something in the dark, and so that is deceptively simple, because it can really, it even scares me now when I'm kind of walk around the house and hear a sound in the house in the dark in the middle of the night. But I think the movie sort of got away from that, and that's okay, because there was a pressure to kind of reinvent over and over and go in a new direction all the time. But I think that sometimes horror films just forget that the primal fear of what actually really scares people is should be the core of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is hard to do, like, when you're dealing with a franchise character right now. I remember you started seeing 5 and 6 and 7 in the theater. People cheered when Jason showed up now. He was the hero, the anti-hero of the movie. So was Freddy, So you're going to see all the crazy ways Jason would kill people. Versus the first 2 or 3 movies, I mean, Jason was still scary. I remember like seeing part 3 in 3D in the theater, and Jason was like, people were genuinely, oh my God, this guy's, that's hard to do when Jason's taking Manhattan, and running around and boxing and doing stuff. Those are fun movies. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the part of that, and this is something that Lee and I have talked about, is that Jason, there can be an argument that he's sort of still alive up until the end of part 4. He gets stabbed and shot and hung and all that stuff, but you could still say, well, he's not really a zombie. By the time he shows up in part 6, because part 5 was, Roy, spoilers, there's no question. He got maggots all over him. His face is all rotted out and distorted. It's a lot easier to see the big zombie as less than an actual threat that you might encounter, in a barn out in the middle of nowhere. One of the things that's really fascinating to me is, as we've been sort of talking about, after part 5, or actually probably part 4, when they're looking at a new beginning, and then Jason is a Frankenstein monster and Jason versus the psychic, it seemed like Paramount and the filmmakers they were working with wanted to get away from this idea of, we've already done 4 of these things, they're all kind of the same, so let's do something different. But a lot of the fan chatter that I've heard in the last couple of decades, and even in regards to the 2009 reboot, is you just want to get Jason back in camp killing people. You don't need a big backstory or big heroic sci-fi narrative. You just basic simple stalk and slash through the woods, some boobs and blood, and some creative kills. Now, I don't know what the future of the franchise holds, because it's sort of tied up in rights litigation now, but do you have any insight as to how that whole thing is going? Like when we might see another Friday the 13th, or do you think we're going to be stuck, and not stuck in a bad way, but just because there's a lot of fan films going around out there on the internet. People are saying, well, if we can't have official Jason, we're going to make our own. Do you think we're going to be in that mode for a while, or do you think we'll see Jason again on the big screen?
Yeah, I hate to say it, I'm somewhat pessimistic. I think it's going to be a while, just because, the lawsuit, then there's appeals, and now with COVID, the decision's being held up. And then you have the whole issue of, I'd say both Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller, are older. Once if they pass, then the estate takes over. Then you have the family of people that start fighting over things, and there isn't really a willingness to shake hands and resolve it. It's very much 2 sides fighting to the death over it. So that's why I'm a little pessimistic, is, there doesn't really seem to be any movement like, hey guys, you know what, let's just resolve our differences. If, fans want a new movie, we can all make some money. Let's compromise. That doesn't seem to be happening. So it's the opposite, unfortunately. It's like Freddy versus Jason, literally, it's like, fight to the death. And then there's always the appeals process. So I think it's going to be a little while. Like, I thought with the success of Halloween 2018, they would have saw that and been like, fuck, there's so much money on the table. Can I swear, by the way, in here?
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay, good. Fuck yeah. All right. Yeah, so, you know what I mean? But that didn't even shake the tree, so to speak. So, but a big issue that people don't talk about is the theatrical. So when they did the remake, they were wanting to do a sequel right away. And then when the numbers came in, because it was a co-production, because the rights are so complicated, it was Paramount and Warner Brothers together, they both realized that they felt there's a ceiling to Friday the 13th. It's not even like Halloween or Scream, which, the new Halloween made over 100 million, Scream made a ton of money. Friday the 13th always kind of capped out, at a certain level. There's certain people that just won't see a Friday the 13th film that will see a Scream film, for example, or I Know You Did Last Summer, or a Get Out, or those kind of movies. So a big reason the sequels never happened to the remake was, they're like, hey, we're only going to make $60-70 million on this movie. There's 2 studios, we're splitting it. Paramount was very on. They're like, we only make 12 movies a year. Why should we give one of our spots to a movie that's only going to make us $30 million? It just doesn't make sense for them. So unless a Blumhouse or someone moves in and gets the rights, I don't know if the major studios would be interested in Friday the 13th anymore, because they're probably looking at it more as a TV thing, and they try to get a TV series off the ground called the Crystal Lake Chronicles. So, and the other thing, I would actually love to hear what you guys think is, I was talking about this, so I'll throw it out there. It's not a secret, but there's going to be a Shudder documentary. One of the episodes of this new series is going to be on Friday the 13th. So we were talking about on that the other day was, something like Halloween, you have Laurie Strode. I mean, everyone knows Jamie Lee Curtis. Even if you've never seen a Halloween movie, everyone associates her with Halloween. There's a certain cachet. Scream has big stars in it. Friday the 13th doesn't really have Tommy Jarvis is known by the fans, but I don't think the average person knows who Tommy Jarvis is. So, can you reboot Friday the 13th? I don't know if it would make sense to pull characters from other Friday the 13th movies, because the mainstream person, those people wouldn't mean anything. They wouldn't be a box office draw. So there's that question, you can do a new Halloween and get Jamie Lee Curtis and it's a big deal. You can do a Scream 5 and you get, Courtney Cox back, and oh my God, you get press from Entertainment Tonight on that. Friday the 13th doesn't have that. So I don't know what you guys think. I mean, can you relaunch Friday the 13th? I mean, how do you do it? Because you don't really have any classic characters aside from Jason attached to it.
That's actually a great point. I hadn't thought of it, because Lee and I, when we've been talking about this series, we really have a lot of respect for the heroines, the survivor girls that have come out of each of them, because we're diehards, right? So we know who Dana Kimmel and Amy Steele and all these folks are.
Yeah.
But you bring up a great point. Like, if they were to come out next year and say Friday the 13th is back, and we've got Amy Steele and Dana Kimmel, we're like, who? And no offense to any of those actresses, but I don't know how you solve that problem, aside from maybe going back to what we were talking about earlier. Just have a Friday the 13th movie that gets back to the basics, but you could introduce some of those survivor girls, like maybe they're the grandmothers, I hate to say that, but of the kids who are going to camp now or something like that, and they show up and it's a cameo. It's a nice surprise for the fans, so that, let's assume that we're in a post-COVID environment. By the time this comes out and people are going back to the movies again, you could have that word of mouth. You're going to get the opening weekend fascination of, like, the normies. Oh, there's a new Jason movie. But then when they go and they tell their friends, oh my God, you have to see this because this pays a lot of homage to the original series, then you get perhaps this, I hate to use the phrase second wave for obvious reasons, but you get that that new influx of fans and money. Yeah.
So Peter, I was thinking, I think it would be very hard to recast this franchise in the modern climate, because we're now living in this world where you can't just line up a bunch of people and kill them in a horror film, which, as much as we would all love that, because that's sort of a classic prototype all the way back to Agatha Christie. We just look into mystery, but now you have to have some kind of there's a phrase that called elevated horror, as you both know, and there has to be some sort of meta quality about it, or it has to live in the culture in some way, or speak to some issue in some way that's more than just, the brass tacks of what these movies could sort of get away with, especially the earlier ones. So I'm not sure how you could position this movie in the context of today and make it work. And maybe that's unfair, because a horror film should really just be able to scare you, and that should be good, right? But somehow we're in this world now where horror films have to have incredible twists in them. They have to operate on different levels. They have to completely, by the end of them, make you reevaluate where you've been for the last 90 minutes. And somehow there's some kind of, at least the ones that get the most buzz and that are best received, they have to work in that realm. And even the last Halloween film, if you recall, could have been couched in like the Me Too movement, or her character certainly was so industrious in that movie, and able to take Michael Myers down in some meaningful way. And so it could be in the conversation of the moment. And I think these movies, it would be great if somebody would write a great slasher film again, but with what dimensions that would make it work right now, Yeah,
I think that's exactly it. I mean, 'cause you look at Halloween 2018 and the Scream movies, those are their trauma. I mean, that's the big thing right now, right? It's some sort of past trauma the character has that now they have to deal with. And they become empowered, even get out in some ways it's about microaggressions, and so I mean, I don't know how you connect that that seems to be the hip time. I don't want to say hip because that sounds demeaning, but because these are important topics, and I'm glad movies are exploring that. But right now, yeah, the kind of the trend seems to be movies about some sort of post-traumatic thing and dealing with that and becoming empowered, I don't know how you fit Friday the 13th into that right now. So maybe you have to do something new with it and hope it connects. But now it seems like everyone's trying to bring, Scream 5 even is okay. We're going to do the same thing Halloween 2018 did, which is bring back the same people and make into a big event. Oh, they're back to another movie. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm curious to see with the new Halloween Kills, I think it's called, because they're bringing characters like Tommy Doyle and Lindsay Wallace. Like, again, fans know who those are, but the average person has no idea who Tommy Doyle is. So it's going to be interesting to see if it has as big a box office, this time. And same with Scream 5. I'll be curious to see if kids even know who Courtney Cox is. I don't know. Do they? I don't know.
Well, there was an uproar when they removed Friends from Netflix a while ago, so someone knows who Courtney Cox is.
Okay.
But here's two pitches if anyone's listening, and including you guys if you're listening to this. Okay, you've got the contemporary angle to Friday the 13th. A group goes out into the woods to get away from a pandemic, and all of a sudden they run into Jason. The second angle is, if you want to just go for nostalgia, you look at like Stranger Things, a huge hit on Netflix. When I think the fourth or fifth season is going to be coming out. I feel like you could do a complete throwback movie to the era. Like something that Lee and I had talked about is there's this really weird gap in Friday the 13th between the final chapter and Jason Lives, because part 5 was a new beginning, but Tommy Jarvis was 13 when he killed Jason, and then he comes back, and I think he's supposed to be 19 or 20. So you've got 6 or 7 years when there's literally apparently no one being killed at Camp Crystal Lake. So either you could make a really funny short film about like what's going on at Camp Crystal Lake in that time, or you could try and go back and fill in some of the gaps of like what was going on the sort of the lost years of Crystal Lake. A complete period piece takes place in 1985 or 86. And like I said, just get back to the basics. I mean, hell, you've got Wonder Woman 84. It's a superhero movie set in the 80s. And I don't know if they're going to have any kind of meta context in that, but I feel like it could be done. And like you mentioned Blumhouse, and I think that's a great idea because he could do it on the cheap. And if it only makes, $20 million profit, then that's enough to make another one.
We some of us have gone out to, and Peter, you probably have done this, gone out to the Novo Bosco camp in New Jersey and tour the locations of the original shooting locations. And they do these sort of weekends where you can go and actually be there in the mix and go to all the locations. And believe it or not, the Boy Scouts who run the camp will take you out in the canoe.
I love it.
But this is a super fun idea, because what if there was a group of people that were going on one of those tours in the exact location of the first movie, and then who knows what could happen. So I guess there are sort of fun ways to do it that would please fans. I wanted to segue just if we could and talk about the Scream Factory box coming up. I mean, for many of us, we've been thinking for decades about the lost footage from part 2, and we all know the stories about it disappearing from the Paramount vault and or being destroyed, or nobody ever being able to find the film. It was always until of late, as just a holy grail that would never be found, and maybe it never will be on film. But tell us a little bit about what was procured from Carl Fullerton.
Yeah, sure. So when I did the book, 2003, whatever, Greg Nicotero, I was interviewing him about Jason Goes to Hell, and he was just like, he just told the story. He's like, oh yeah, I was doing Day of the Dead, and I remember we were talking about gore and violence and ratings, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember when I went to Carl Fulton's house for Day of the Dead to pick up something, and he said, hey, do you want to see footage from Friday Part 2? It was the uncut stuff, and you guys might remember that story. So I know when they did the documentary, Crystal Lake Memories, the producers of that called Carl, and they weren't able, he didn't want to interview, I don't know, I wasn't a part of it, and it was just a bad time or whatever. And so it was just by chance, so Eddie Samuelson, the producer, one of the producers of the box set, said, I'm going to try, call Carl, and because he's watched the documentary again, and he's like, hey, I wonder if he still has that footage. So he called Carl, and it was a much different story. Carl was, talked to him and said, okay, and the cool thing was Carl was about to retire. So I think he was in a good mood. So he's like, yeah, I'll look in the garage. So he went in his garage and he found a 40-year-old VHS tape Eddie calls me, he's all excited, he's like, oh my God, Carl called me, it's great. It's all down to Eddie because he had the idea to call Carl again. And it just so happened those weird things like the universe is smiling on you. And Carl Ford happened to be in LA on his last job. So when he flew to LA, he's like, I'll bring the tape with me. And so I went to his hotel here in LA, and he literally gave me the videotape. And I was like, oh my God, it's like the Holy Grail, like you said. And it said Friday the 13th Part 2. I have a picture I can send to you. But so the big thing was just, okay, this is a 40-year-old VHS tape. Like, what's on it? Like, what is it? And Carl didn't quite remember. He just remember we had cut footage. So I thought, was it a videotape of like them filming it? What was it? We didn't know. Is it even usable? So they had to send it to the post house. They literally had to bake the tape in an oven. So I guess tapes when they're old, they start sticking together. They're like, we run this through the machine, it's just gonna fall apart. So they bake the tape, and like everyone's like reading, like, oh my God. And they did a one-time transfer, then it literally fell apart. So I have seen the footage. So what it was is Carl called Steve Miner and said, hey, I know they're cutting the movie, but I'd love to have this for my reel. So what Steve Miner gave him was the original cut gore scenes from the first version of the film they submitted to the MPAA. So it's the edited footage from the movie. Like it's 4:3, it's videotape. So it's not the greatest quality, but it's good. So it's literally each scene, from the movie. There's no sound, but it's the full murder scenes as they would have been in the movie before the MPAA, did anything to them. So they're all on there. So it's Adrian, Russell Todd, Walt Corney's death, the spear, Tom Bragge gave the machete, and then Laura Marie Taylor's is actually a little bit longer too. Mm-hmm. So it's all the cut gore, yeah, and it's 4:3. So you guys will get to see that. So
how do you feel about the remastering of that? What will it look like?
So I've seen the pre-restored. So it's a videotape, so it's a little dark. I think they're gonna try to brighten it up. So I've not seen the tweaking they did to it, but you can see everything. So there's no sound. So yeah, what I saw was a little bit dark, so I'm hoping they're able to brighten it up a bit. But there's one kill in particular that has a moment that no one ever told. I've never heard. We're all like, what? So I think that's the one people are gonna be talking about. It's not what you think, like everyone knows a spear, but there's another one that has a little moment to it, a little twist. That's kind of cool. So I think you guys will like that one. So
yeah, one of the and this is, I'm very excited for this because I think, Lee, we talked about this when we talked about Friday the 13th Part 2, was the VHS tape, going into the video store and see that, because it had the spear scene, that one still of it going through the back, and that little nice pool of blood, and the horrified image of the girl's face. And I'm like, I really have to see that. And then just to watch the movie, at 10 or whatever it was, when I saw it, like, what happened? This is a cut version.
Yeah.
And it was just by the MPAA. So this is, I know it's a sick thrill to be able to finally see it, but it is one of those things where, as Friday the 13th fans, you wonder, because they say it's lost, it's probably destroyed or decayed or beaten up somewhere. But the fact that it's finally coming out is just wonderful.
Yeah. So what happened is, I know when they did the documentary, Ghost Lake Memories, I'm not sure on the documentary, there's been so many DVDs and Blu-rays, I forget. I know there was a Chris Lake from Manhattan, and then they did standalones. I don't remember. But Dan Ferns was one of the producers, and they went and hunted, and they unfortunately found the orders from Paramount for 5, 6, and 7 to throw away the footage. But they were able to find the cut scenes from 4. The Blu-ray of that has the original camera negative. You've seen all that, I'm sure. I think someone even did a fan cut. Like, that's something you could take and recut the movie, and if you added a new score to connect it in audio, you could make a true, original cut of the final chapter. But so this time for Scream Factor, we looked, but Paramount says we don't have 2 and 3. It's been tossed aside. So the only reason there's anything is because Carl Ford didn't have this videotape, So according to Paramount, they threw away 2 and 3. So that's the original camera negative. Without that, you can't. You're stuck with whatever copy you have. So I said, can we just go and look? Because if they had 4, it just makes me think, is it mislabeled? Like, literally, it's the Paramount archive. It's like just rows and rows of, stored things. And maybe it's mislabeled, but they won't let you just go through, unfortunately, and like look. And because you literally have to take film out. Like with Part 4, Dan was telling me, they literally said, okay, here's camera rolls. They had to open it up and just look and see, what is this? And that's where they found the ending. And you know what I mean? It's just, stuff. Because back then there was no DVD, there was no one did uncut version. You know, there was no, you know, director's cuts. It's very rare that I think maybe Close Encounters had one. And that was unusual. So like no one kept this. They didn't think to keep this stuff, which is a shame. The other thing was these were independent, you know, people forget these weren't technically produced by Paramount. So what would happen would be Frank Mancuso Jr. would get a phone call saying the movie made money to make me another Friday the 13th. They would basically get a guarantee. So they would get, the independent producers, they would produce it independently for $2 or $3 million with a guarantee that when they finished the movie and gave it to Paramount, they'd be paid their money and get profits. So they were called negative pickups. So Paramount literally did not have anything to do with it. They were not on set. There was no studio executive. They would just shoot the movie. So all Paramount got was like whatever the filmmakers gave us. They gave us the film after it was edited. So sometimes they didn't even get the, you know, it wasn't a Paramount production where they would archive this stuff like they do with like a, you know, a Roman Polanski movie or something. So yeah, unfortunately back then well, you guys have heard stories, right, about a lot of lost movies from the 70s and 80s where the negative can't be found. And
I mean, I think we're all sort of holding out hope that something will happen like happened on My Bloody Valentine, that the will be not only found but then restored into the actual cut.
Yeah.
So who knows, you know?
Yeah. My hope, I might get, maybe it is somewhere in Paramount, but someone needs to be able to go and literally go through box and look for it, as opposed to like, I said, the Paramount folks are like, they just go and check. Oh, it's not there. Sorry. You know, how did the person who works in the archive really spend 2 days looking through all the boxes? No. So, yeah.
Well, and I don't know if you have any insight here, but especially now in the age where DVD and Blu-ray and special features are kind of a big thing. I mean, well, I should say we're kind of past that now because everything's on demand and VOD and everything. But at one point, there was a heyday where there was some demand for this. And I think with Scream Factory's new release, that's going to be evident because there are people who are shelling out significant chunks of cash to get this ultimate kind of edition. But with movie studios having these big archive rooms and potentially having these same problems that we're discussing with this VHS tape, I mean, film also degrades. Do you know if there's any effort or any idea to digitizing this stuff or cleaning it up with the idea that, because someday this is all going to be potentially lost?
Yeah. I mean, I think from what I'm saying is that studios routinely they did 2K, now they're doing 4K, now they're doing 8K, you know, scans of stuff that's in vaults. But from my understanding is it's only based on demand. So yeah, they'll do it for Jaws, you know, and Star, you know, but they're not going to spend, you know, $500,000 doing an 8K scan of, you know, some rare 70s movie that no one saw, you know. We all know, you know, movies like, it takes someone like a My Bloody Valentine, there has to be an independent producer who goes and makes the effort. And then, you know, so, and look, I mean, I don't know at My Bloody Valentine how long it took them or what kind of work was needed to find that footage. Yeah. But that was a Paramount movie. Sorry, the same thing where that was released by Paramount, but it wasn't produced by Paramount. And then it changed hands. It was Lionsgate and now it's Scream Factory. So yeah, I'd be curious to know where they found it actually. But yeah, the hard thing is, you know, you have to get a studio then to let you go and crawl through their vaults and do that kind of work. I don't know much about it. Like that would be a cool, nice job to have, wouldn't it? To be like an archivist who goes in like, I can tell you one story. So when I did the book, I went to Paramount and the licensing guy was really nice. I said, you know, Sean Cunningham was great. He like went to bat and called Paramount and New Line and said, hey, I'd really like this book to happen. Freddy versus Jason's coming out. Because I said, look, I don't have a ton of money. Like, you know, this isn't a James Bond book where I can give you $50,000 for photo clearances. So they were really great and gave a good deal. I said, but look, like we don't have the manpower to really do this stuff. So they let me go literally down into where they keep stills and said, you know, we haven't looked for Friday the 13th. I don't know. And literally it was a series of boxes with dust all over them. It said Friday the 13th, 1, 2, 3, 4, literally in a little thing. And it had all slides, old slides of all the stills, you know, like that's why there isn't a lot of stills for 4 and 6 in the book, because they were water damaged. And when we found the box, literally there was water damage. Wow. So a lot of the cool stills are gone. But that's the thing, like they were literally just, you know, the old, you know, the white things with the, like when you had in school with a projector, the little slides. And so I literally had to go and I bought for $1,000 a little slide scanner machine, and I would put the little slides in, slide each. And so I have them all digitally archived, but that's because I did a book. Otherwise those would literally be sitting in a box in Paramount collecting dust somewhere. So the studios have so many movies and so many titles that unless someone looks for it, mean, because we all know like a million movies. Like I love there's so many movies from the 70s that are just rare. You know, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, what's a really obscure movie that you love that no one else has ever heard of? Like, I was watching Prophecy from 1979. You remember that movie?
Oh yeah.
But like, no one knows that. I mean, if Scream Factory didn't dig that out, the studio is not going to spend money to do an 8K restoration of Prophecy. Or, you know, it's just, you know. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if they go through their vaults and digitize everything at some point, but I know they do it for the bigger titles. They definitely. So we're not going to lose everything, but this kind of stuff, yeah, unless someone takes the time.
So
like Paramount's right.
Like,
yeah.
sometimes it takes somebody who just loves the movie so much to, you know, triumph through the process. Like when Scream actually released The Final Terror on Blu-ray, you know, that, you know, I have, I think, 3 or 4 35 millimeter prints of that film. So I sent them all my reels, which was like 15 reels.
Yeah. Awesome.
You know, combined my reels with some reels from another collector, and actually we were able to make the Blu-ray, you know, because the you know, original elements for the film are
awesome.
And so sometimes you just turn to a private collector who's willing to do that, and then it'll remain forever, you know, digitized. But there are so many that we'll lose simply because they just won't benefit like that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, unless people rescue them. And I understand. Even Scream Factory said, you know, they have there's a budget. Like the new box said, only certain movies are getting 4K remasters. You've probably seen the list. I think 1 through 4. I think they're doing some stuff with 6, but like from my understanding is the reason there aren't any new extras on Freddy versus Jason and their remake is because Warner said, look, we will give you the disc. So how it works is when they license a thing like a box set, the licensing fee is per disc. So when Scream Factory sells a copy, they have to pay the person that licensed the movie from X number of dollars per disc in the set. So Warner is like, we will give you this literally the same disc from the previous releases. You put them in, you'll pay us, but you can't make a new remaster for some. Like that was Warner because they're crazy. Don't get me started on Warner Brothers. That is a whole thing about the book. But you know, whereas like Paramount was cooler and they'll let them do some new scans and add stuff, and because all that has to be clear. Like when we do all the commentaries for the box set, Paramount listens to them and gives us notes that you can or can't say that. Luckily, there was nothing we had to worry about this time. But I know other friends who produce stuff that like MGM is known as the toughest. They'll literally like the Poltergeist 3 Blu-ray that came out, that commentary, they had to go back and remove all instances mentioning that Heather Work passed away. MGM says you cannot mention the fact that she died.
Wow.
Isn't that strange?
Is that like an estate thing or?
It's
like
MGM is just they're very particular. Wow. Like anything that's controversial, they don't want. So you end up with these watered down. But like everyone knows, you know, Heather Work died. So this was great. Paramount didn't make us cut anything, but like the footage, the uncut footage, we had to get approved. They had to get approved because it's unrated, and stuff. But like Paramount used to be very harsh about that. But now I think they're just. It all depends on who's there. You know, I mean. I've heard stories where like one day it's, you know, someone's at Warner Brothers and then that person quits and then the next person that's in charge of this comes in and they're totally different. It's like the MPAA, like it's a different set of people reviewing their movie. They'll let one movie pass with tons of gore, the next movie gets chopped to shreds because it's just arbitrary. So yeah.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about you know, our personal favorites in the franchise. You know what our favorites are. I'll start by saying you know, part 2 is, as Ian knows, is my favorite. It'll always be you know, I thought it was the perfect combination of a little bit better production values than the original one. Really sharp directing from Steve Miner. I thought the actors were great. It's my favorite version of Jason and all of them, and of course the only time that we ever saw him sort of looking the way he looks in this movie, which was you know, pre-hockey mask, of course, and there's just something about that movie. I think it's a real thriller. It really works, and it's exciting, and I think the again just the professionalism of the package and the likability of all the actors in the movie. I mean, I just think lightning sort of struck for me with that one, and I probably watch that movie once a week in some way, shape, or form. I either fall asleep to it or I have it on while I'm working. Otherwise, but something, nothing ever came close to that one for me, even though the first one certainly is right after it.
No, totally. You want to go next, Ian, or?
Yeah, briefly. You know, Lee really brought me around on 2. I hadn't really thought much about it except for the kills, but yeah, that's a great cast of, you know, again, really likable kids. I also, you know, love part 6 because that's one of the early, you know, that was one of my early Friday the 13th kind of experiences. I also like the humor of it, and some of the deaths were really creative. Plus that the family storyline, with the sheriff dad and Megan, I thought was really touching. And this is something I'd like to talk about in a second too, after if you talk your favorite Friday, is how the experience of watching these movies has changed as we've gotten older. But yeah, with that, Peter, please, what's your favorite, or can you choose?
Sure. It's the first four for me. That was sort of the golden era for me. Part of it was age, but I like a little. I think it was I like the atmosphere. I like the reality of it. Jason's still a real person. I know it stretches credibility a bit that, he gets axes in his head and hung, and he still lives, but he's still a real person. And I prefer a little slower pace. I like less characters that a little bit more. I'm fine with watching the first, even part two. There's only maybe 8 deaths in the whole movie, and when you start getting up to part 5 and Jason takes Manhattan, Jason's killing 30 people. Literally, people show up on screen for 10 seconds, die. It doesn't connect. I mean, it can be fun, but I don't connect to it. So yeah, I love the creepy build. Like I love shots like in part 2 when you just cut to Jason's shadow against a wall, or rain dripping on a leaf. Shots of the lake. Like I like that kind of mood and atmosphere. I'm old school that way, so that's why I like the first 4. And I think Jason, I agree with you, Lee. He's really scary in 2 and 3 to me, because I like the idea he's just this scary little boy who doesn't really know what he's doing yet. He's just learning. I hate it sounds horrible, but he's learning how to kill. I mean, this is like, like the scene with Jenny and the chainsaw. Like he's actually scared of that chainsaw. He's backing away. Once he becomes like a super zombie, like it's fun, but now he's a superstar. Like the later Friday nights, he's making his entrance. He's shot and lit. Like even the remake, some of those shots, like those are trailer shots. Like they're engineering things to make him like an icon, which is fun again. But that's the great thing too about the first few. Like no one knew Jason was an icon yet. Like the hockey mask, like they would never do that today. Where like in part 3, literally Shelley goes into the barn and then Jason just walks out with the mask on, and like he just put it like no big deal. But that's what's so cool about it. It's like it's not overdone. We're like, oh, it's this big moment. He got his hockey mask. He just grabbed the hockey mask and put it on and became iconic without even trying. And so that's cool. Like I love the badass moment when he shoots her with the thing and then he just like tosses the thing and walks away. Like yeah, that's cool to me. But anyway. So.
I think, it might sound sacrilegious in a way to the franchise, but for me, Warrington Gillette's moment at the end of part 2 is always going to be, to me, the scariest moment in the whole franchise, and the most revealing moment. It was the first time we ever saw the face of Jason, with the exception of Ari Lehman, of course, in the flashback sequence. But that particular moment, which is really just a jump scare, and nothing to do, not as much to do with atmosphere or sequence building or anything, but that is a pretty damn good jump scare, and every time I see the movie, it gets me every single time. And I just think that's one of the great moments across the franchise.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was crying in that in real life when he hit the window because he hit it so hard.
Yeah.
The next take when he comes from, you see the slow mo and all this gook is coming out. That's him crying through the makeup because he's in so much pain. So it's like snot and shit. But yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah, I'm with you on that. So, but I meet a lot of people. They love later Jason. They like superhero Jason. So,
Now, one of the fun things in revisiting this series now, as not only adults and film critics, and some people might think you're film critics, why are you wasting your time analyzing 80s slasher movies? Because there's no better way to live, frankly. But is what we've both watched these movies a lot during the course of our lives, but going back with the idea of analyzing them and really talking about them, one of the things I know has driven Lee crazy is I'm constantly asking about the timelines, and I'm coming up with theories and the continuity. I'm just going on and on about this, and he's like, it doesn't matter. You humor me, and I love you for it, man. But one of the things that I really picked up on as an adult and thinking about these as actual stories is in part 1, and just Peter, I want you to tell me if I'm completely crazy and should be thinking about other things with this brain of mine. Steve Christie, the camp owner, when he gets killed, it struck me that Mrs. Voorhees was sort of striking out at the Christie family because she sees them as being ultimately responsible because Jason drowned at their camp, and it's still a family camp that he's sort of managing. So when she kills the Christie's son, it's almost like that's her ultimate retribution for the fact that, quote unquote, the Christie's took away her boy. And that's, yeah, it's the camp murdering the counselors and everybody. Like she can't allow that place to reopen. It's sort of that, run of the mill vindication, but it's also this decades long grudge against this one family.
So that's I always thought, I have to go back and listen to the dialogue. Because there was the scene, the only scene they really explained the background of Steve Christie, if I'm not mistaken, you guys, and you might know too, is the first movie is Annie's in the truck with Enos, the truck driver, Rex Everhart. And he's saying, Steve Christie's dropped all this money into the camp. He's crazy. And for what? So I always got the impression that Steve Christie was just this guy who saw this opportunity to buy this camp and fix it up. I didn't know if he was actually related or connected to the original camp owners. Well, that happened. That's what I'm not sure about.
Because when the first thing Mrs. Voorhees says when she meets up with Adrian King is she says, I'm Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies, which maybe she's got like a relationship that goes back a little further than that.
Well, she
obviously knows him. Yeah.
He says that when he's impaled. What are you doing out here?
Yeah,
he knows her. Yeah, I didn't know if he knew her from reopening the camp recently, like she's heard about this camp, so she's like hanging around. And because you're right, if he's an old friend, then I don't know what the family connection. Maybe his parents own the original camp, and he's now. That's something you could definitely add in, and that would make sense. Like it wouldn't conflict with anything in the movie. It could work. Yeah.
For the future sequel that's coming out.
Yes.
You've got a screenplay going on there.
Yeah, exactly. I just love how like Steve Christie's supposed to be like the hot counselor guy that everyone wants to like Adrian King's. I'm like, really? Like that always makes me laugh. Like he's
so like of the time though. He's such a like 70s guy, right? He's like
totally.
The short shorts, the porn stash, the red scarf,
And the old woman at the diner in that one scene, it's raining, and she's flirting with him, like, oh, take me out for a night in the town, Steve. I'm like, what is going on in this town? Are they that desperate?
The Steve Christie origin story. That'll be the next one.
Yes.
So, I when I was doing some research for this conversation, I saw something on IMDb about another documentary about Jason Goes to Hell. Is that right?
Yes, Hearts of Darkness. So it started like 3 years ago. Someone had an idea and started putting together, and then Adam Marcus got involved, his production company. I conducted the interviews for it. I think there's still a few more we want to do. So I think they're starting to put together and kind of edit it. And I think with COVID, it was hard. Like we were doing a bunch of stuff up through February, and then like John LeMay, we were supposed to interview, and then COVID came, and now we've done a couple remote, but you just want to make sure that it looks good. So it's really hard because to do it safely, it's tough. So, but it is coming. So I think they're hoping next year now. So originally the plan was this fall, but.
So why Jason Goes to Hell the final Friday to warrant its own documentary? What was the germ of that?
That was really, so there was a guy kind of posted about it. His name was Nick Hunt, and he kind of had the idea. He was a big fan, and he felt it was just a really underappreciated movie and kind of hated. And so he had the idea to do that, and then it kind of grew from there. And now Eddie Samuelson's directing it, who was one of the producers on the box set. Adam Marcus, is involved as well. And I think it's just because, if there's a group of fans that want it, like I know there was a part 3 documentary that was made a while back. Have you heard about that one? It was just on part 3.
No.
There was small, it started out as more of a documentary about Richard Brooker, but then it kind of became all about part 3 that came out, like, I think 4 years ago. Netflix, there's a show called The Movies That Made Us. Have you heard about it? Yeah. They're doing a standalone on just the first Friday the 13th. I think that comes out next year. So there's always kind of people that want to go a deeper dive. And of course, there's been the Blu-rays and DVDs, which have documentaries just on specific parts of the movie. And then there's Crystal Lake Memories, which did the documentary, which did a thing. So it's really as if fans want it, and the fans, they did, I think, an Indiegogo for the Hearts of Darkness one. And there was enough fans that wanted Jason Goes to Hell documentary. So there you go. So
do you know anything about the screening next month from Fathom and what sort of print they're using? As you know, it's going to be back, but a few people have asked me, well, is it the 4K remaster? I mean, what is Fathom?
Yes, I believe it's all sent from the 4K remaster that was done, and it's the uncut version, and that's what's going to be used. I'm assuming it's going to be digitally projected from my fan. That's pretty much everything is. I don't think they made a film print. I actually got to see, this was 10 years ago here in LA, IMAX. They did a Halloween thing. They actually showed Friday the 13th in IMAX, went up to IMAX, which was amazing. So I sat in the theater, and I mean, seeing the first Friday the 13th in IMAX, it was like, yeah, it was very interesting. So it'd be cool to see part 2 that way. There's a theater here called the New Beverly, which Quentin Tarantino owns, and they only do film prints, and they did some Friday the 13th, and that was a lot of fun to see part 2 in a real 35mm print. Because I mean, I like digital, but it's just something cool about seeing film prints on the big screen. But yeah, from what I understand, this new one is going to be a digital projection of the 4K remasters. I mean, it'll look great, but yeah.
So what do you have coming up next? I mean, we talked about COVID and everything, but are you able to keep working on some projects or keep moving forward on something?
I am. I started a new project, kind of research phase, a couple of years ago. So I don't know if you guys are fans of 90s and early 2000s slasher movies, but just like Chris, like, remember, I thought, oh, it'd be cool. You know, I went to the Amazon. I was like, I thought, oh, you know, someone must have written a book about like Scream and I Know You Last Summer and those movies, and there isn't one. So I started that. I'm working on it. I've done about 150 interviews for that book. So if you're a fan of I Know You Last Summer, Urban Legend, Scream movies, I cover a little bit of the remakes later. It's going to be another Chris Like Memories coffee table monstrosity on those films. The only problem with COVID, it delayed things a bit, so I'm working on it. Also, I'm slower because I'm older. So, but I'm hoping at the end of next year, we'll hopefully announce it in a couple months. So
very cool.
It's called Scary Movies. Yeah. So, yeah.
Love it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Lee, do you have anything else? I think we've covered a lot.
Oh, man.
No,
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we could keep going for another hour if we.
Sure. Yeah, we could. Yeah. I know.
But,
I feel like it went by like that. It goes by so fast. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So do I, unfortunately.
I mean, I just would say, I mean, I think for all three of us and many other people, I mean, there's a moment when you sort of realize that movies, and maybe this happens to everybody, regardless of how old you are or what era of movies you grew up in, that movies sort of transcend the idea that they're a movie, that they become part of your DNA, or they're part of, you see the world or how, whatever it is. I mean, in this series of movies, for me, the first 5 of them has been like lots of other movies, a huge part of my adult life. And so it's a very abstract thing to think about in a way, but you know, I return to them all the time, and so many other movies in the slasher genre. I guess I would say that I don't know, I mean, there's something magical about them and nostalgic about them, and I mean, I don't know what else to say except to say that you know, I think this is a legion of millions of people, because when I am going on the convention circuit and you know, just it's pretty fascinating to think that this subgenre of movies that were just culturally dismissed in so many ways have been so fulfilling and influential for so many people over eras, and yeah, it's just good to kick them around. So
yeah, that's crazy. I mean, there's so many movies I love. Like, you know, I love Ordinary People from 1980. No one's doing Ordinary People conventions, but here we are 40 years later, and they're still talking about Friday the 13th. I mean, you wouldn't think, but there's something about these movies connected people. So yeah, before for a while I thought, well, not you never feel bad about it, but I was like, isn't it kind of weird that I'm still like, why do I care about Friday the 13th? But talking to a lot of the people in the movie, they're like, you know, they just accept it now. Like, they never would have thought in a million years when they did Friday the 13th 40 years ago that people would still care, but they do. So you just appreciate it, you know, because it's crazy. 40 years. I mean,
it's amazing. I mean,
yeah.
It's not even so much watching the films. I think sometimes it's reading the magazines or looking at the stills or just being amongst the memorabilia or just whatever it is. Maybe some would say it's trying to recapture that feeling, that innocence in movies and in a particular time in your life. But you know, whatever it is, you know, I don't want to feel guilty about it. So
It's just, it's fun. I mean, it's like hearing a favorite song on the radio. Like, nothing wrong. I mean, it's good that art lasts, right? I mean, everything's so disposable now. I mean, you go, I hate to say it, but you go on streaming, and there's like, I know there's like 1,000 shows at any one time. There's some great stuff, but like, does anyone remember most of the stuff, even the good stuff? Like, it's so, you just click to watch, and it's streaming on your phone, and it's not the same like when we were kids and we waited in line, or you waited months to see a movie, or you I remember driving an hour to like some small theater just to see a rare movie I've never seen before because you couldn't watch it on video.
Yeah.
That means something, and those experiences, I don't think they're being replicated. I don't think streaming is the same.
Yeah, totally. Ian mentioned something earlier that I thought was important. Maybe we should just quickly kick it around. Is that the idea of streaming now replacing physical media, and we know that there are a lot of studios unwilling to jump into the 4K game because they just look at the 4K sales and so forth, and so on and so forth. And for me, I'll never let go of physical media simply because the packaging, the one sheet on the package, the different formats from CED disc to all the way up to 4K. I mean, it just is. It's fun to just have the product. I mean, to have the the piece. And sometimes you could just spend a whole night looking at all the pieces, or the one sheets, or the magazines, or whatever, and not even get to looking at the movie. It's the the tangible quality of all that stuff that's just great to have. So
it's a level of depth of meaning for you that. And I understand, like for a lot of people, they like movies, but they see a couple movies a year, or they're raising families, or they're like sports. That's all cool. And to them, movies is just something in the background they do once in a while. But for people more like us, it means so much more to us. So the physical thing, the tangible connection is important. And again, it's not for everyone, but I hope it doesn't go away. I'm kind of in the middle. What I do is I buy Blu-rays and stuff, and I rip them and I stream them through my Apple TV from my hard drive, and I keep the physical thing. But I never open it. So when I watch movies, I'm streaming it from my own collection. I don't actually physically put the disc in when I play the movie, but I still buy, it's still important to have that physical part. So, I'm not the thing about all streaming without the physical part is then we've all seen it happen. Like you go to the service and the movie's not available anymore. It's gone, or they take it down that month, or, and something about building a collection too. I think, again, if you're really connected to a movie or music or whatever it is that you love, just having your own collection is fun. Maybe it's silly because you're like, but having it on the shelf and having your collection and seeing everything together, there's something cool about having that.
And that even
there's never going to. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that for people with this collector gene that we have, that transcends physical media. Because I know when I go to my Voodoo library, if I get a new code or something, I put it in. It's like, you have 156 movies. I'm like, oh my god, this wallpaper library! It's so much fun to look at. So it's a sickness, but I'm okay with it.
It is. I mean, I can't tell you. I get so much pleasure out of putting a tape into a top-loading Panasonic VCR that has a wood grain panel on the front with dials for the different channels. I mean, that to me is how I define joy in life. I think is.
My big thing is I used to love was staying up late to watch the movie on the Late Show, and just knowing, like watching Halloween at the Fog, or and even with the commercials, but being up in my pajamas as a kid and knowing that there was probably some other kid in some other state doing the same thing, and just the atmosphere of staying up late at night and seeing the crickets outside in Chicago. And something about that is a really good memory. It's like putting the tape in. It's like, so now like when I go to YouTube sometimes and I find the old broadcast of the movie with the commercials and it has the interstitials, NBC Sunday Night Movie, Halloween,
Right.
I love all that stuff.
I used to I had an audio tape recorder, and I would record them on audio tape as they were playing on broadcast television. This was before we had a VCR, and then you just listen to the movie on audio tape, and it was sort of like seeing it again. So
I did that with the Police Academy movies, strangely enough. I don't know why.
That's hilarious.
Somewhere I have my audio cassette of Citizens on Patrol. I don't know.
Well, you'll be excited. My friend is doing a documentary on the Police Academy movies. I don't know if you've heard about that.
No.
They got Steve Guttenberg. Even Kim Cattrall gave an interview. It's on all the Police Academy movies. It's coming out, I think, next year as a whole Police Academy documentary.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Peter, I can't thank you enough on behalf of both myself and Lee for taking some time to talk with us.
Yeah.
This has been a real thrill. If you feel like talking about another Jason movie, we'd love to have you back on the show sometime.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
That'd be great. Anything horror, I'm happy to.
I don't know if you're picking up on this, but there are roofers working on my house that just started hammering in earnest. Okay, well that's good. I can hear them. It's driving me nuts. So I think this will be the perfect time to sign off. So again, thank you so much, and take care.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was great to be here.
Thank you guys.